Story 1. The Man in Apartment 3B Outline. 1. Strange noises. When I first moved into my apartment building, the place seemed quiet enough. Thin walls, yes, but nothing unbearable. That changed when Apartment 3B finally got a new tenant. He was a thin, pale man with sunken eyes and skin so colorless it looked almost gray. He barely said a word when we crossed paths in the hallway, but at night, that silence broke into something else entirely. Around midnight, I'd hear scraping noises. At first, it sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor, but it was inconsistent. Scrape, pause, thud. Then silence. Sometimes I could swear I heard muffled whispers right through the vents. The voices were low, raspy, almost like arguing. I pressed my ear against the wall one night and heard something that froze my blood. "Stay still. Don't move." I sat up in bed, heart pounding, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the pattern repeated night after night. Always the same time, always those dragging sounds and faint voices. When I saw him in the stairwell one morning, his eyes locked on mine for just a second. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't friendly. It felt more like a warning. I hurried away, trying to shake the feeling that he knew I had been listening. Outline 2. The smell, it started with a faint, sour smell seeping through the vents. I thought maybe it was spoiled food, but within days the odor grew unbearable, thick, rotten, metallic. It clung to the hallways, heavy enough to make me gag. I reported it to the landlord, who rolled his eyes and said it was probably plumbing. But plumbing doesn't smell like that. I hadn't seen the man in 3B for nearly a week. His blinds stayed shut, no lights turned on at night. Yet the noises continued. Scrapes, thuds, and sometimes a sound like low groaning. One evening, taking out the trash, I noticed several oversized black garbage bags stacked outside his door. They weren't the usual kitchen bags. These were large contractor-style bags, tied tight but leaking something dark onto the carpet. I froze, staring at them. The stench radiating from those bags was almost unbearable. Just then, the door creaked open a few inches. His face peeked through the gap, pale and gaunt, eyes bloodshot and sunken. "It's not what you think," he whispered in a hoarse, frantic tone, then slammed the door shut before I could react. My stomach turned. I wanted to call the police, but fear kept me quiet. What if I was wrong? What if he knew it was me who called? Outline 3, the discovery. The smell only got worse, and soon other tenants began to complain. Still, the landlord did nothing. One night, I was jolted awake by violent banging against my bedroom wall. It wasn't the usual scraping. This was desperate, heavy pounding, as though someone was begging for help. My chest tightened as I fumbled for my phone and called the police. When officers arrived, I waited in the hallway, trembling as they knocked on his door. No response. After minutes of silence, they forced their way in. The moment the door opened, the smell hit us like a wave. I gagged, covering my face, while one officer swore under his breath. Inside, the apartment looked nothing like a home. Plastic tarps lined the floor. Furniture was gone, except for a stained mattress in the middle of the room. Black bags, like the ones I'd seen in the hallway, were piled high, buzzing with flies. Bloodstains smeared across the walls and floor, but the tenant was gone, nowhere in sight. The officers followed a trail of reddish smears into the bathroom, where the tub was coated in something dark and dried. It was like stepping into a nightmare. Outline 4, the aftermath. They eventually found him hours later, hiding inside the crawl space above the ceiling, his body smeared with grime. He was muttering incoherently, insisting that the corpses in the bags were his friends, and that he kept them close so they wouldn't leave. He was taken away, but the image of that apartment never left me. The smell clung to my nose for weeks. I moved out almost immediately after, but even now in my new place, sometimes late at night, I swear I hear faint scraping through the walls, the sound of something being dragged, or maybe someone. Story 2, the locked basement door outline. 1. Moving in. When my wife and I moved into our new suburban home, the first thing we noticed was the basement door. It had 3 locks bolted from the outside. We assumed it was for storage, or maybe the previous owner was overly cautious about break-ins. But something about the scratched wood and the faint smell of mildew unsettled me. Our neighbor across the street, Mrs. Hanson, waved when we moved in. She was kind, but when I mentioned the basement door, her face changed. "Don't mess with that door," she said quickly. "The man before you. He had reasons." Then she walked away, leaving us uneasy. At night, the house felt normal enough, but around 2 a.m., I'd wake to faint thuds from below. At first, I told myself it was pipes or the house settling, but the sounds grew more distinct. Knocks, dragging footsteps, even something brushing against the underside of the basement door. Outline 2. The scratches after a week. I finally dared to inspect the basement more closely. With the locks undone, I opened the door, shining my flashlight into the dark stairwell. The smell hit me immediately. Damp, rotting wood and something metallic like rust or blood. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. My light caught something on the walls. Deep scratch marks gouged into the plaster, running upward as though someone had clawed their way toward the door. At the far end, the basement stretched into darkness. Old furniture was draped with sheets, and a single rusted cot sat in the corner. I froze when I heard it. Faint breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from the shadows. My chest tightened. I aimed my light, but the sound stopped. I ran upstairs, slammed the door, and locked every bolt. That night, the scratching started, soft at first, then growing louder, as though someone was dragging their nails against the inside of the door. Outline 3. The neighbor's warning. The next day, I confronted Mrs. Hanson. She sighed, lowering her voice. "The man who lived there before you. He kept his brother locked in that basement. He claimed his brother was sick, dangerous. Some nights we'd hear screams, but the police never found proof. Then one day, both brothers vanished. House went up for sale a year later. I felt my stomach sink. That explained the locks, the smell, the scratches. But if they had vanished, then what was I hearing at night? That evening, as I bolted the basement shut, my wife asked why I looked so pale. I lied, saying the basement just gave me bad vibes. But at 3 a.m., we both woke to the sound of pounding fists against the door. My wife clutched my arm, eyes wide. "Please," a voice croaked from behind the door. "Please, let me out." Outline 4. The night it opened. I stayed awake, sitting against the basement door with a baseball bat in my hands. The knocking continued until dawn. By the time the sun rose, it was silent. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I had imagined it. But the next night, when I came home from work, I found all 3 locks hanging loose. The basement door stood wide open. My wife swore she hadn't touched it. The house smelled rotten, like something old and festering had been released. That night we didn't sleep. We heard slow, heavy footsteps pacing through the living room. The basement door was closed again, but the locks were on the inside this time. We moved out within the month. The house is still there with a "for sale" sign in the yard. But every time I drive by, I swear I see someone standing in the basement window, watching. Story 3. The Woman in the Garden. Outline 1. A strange sight. I rented a small guest house behind a family's property for cheap. It seemed like the perfect deal. Quiet neighborhood, plenty of space. But on my first night, I noticed a woman standing in the garden around midnight. She was tall, wearing a faded white dress, her hair hanging in front of her face. I assumed she was part of the family, maybe out for air. But the longer I watched, the stranger it felt. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the ground. When I blinked, she was gone. The next morning, I asked the landlord about her. His expression darkened. "We don't go in the garden after dark." "Neither should you." Outline 2. The whispers. Over the following nights, I'd wake around 1 or 2 a.m. and hear whispers through my window. At first, it was soft, like the wind. But soon I could make out words. "Help me. Don't let him find me." When I dared to peek outside, the woman was always there, standing among the overgrown roses. Her dress looked dirtier each night, stained with what looked like mud or blood. Her head would twitch, turning slightly, but I never saw her face. I stopped opening my curtains at night, but the whispers continued, seeping through the walls, filling my head with dread. Outline 3. The Landlord's Story. Finally, I demanded answers from the landlord. He sighed and told me the truth. The previous tenant was a young woman. Her boyfriend was abusive. One night, neighbors heard screams from the garden. By the time anyone came, she was gone. The police searched but never found her body. Some say she never left. My blood ran cold. That explained the stains on her dress, the whispers begging for help. That night, I couldn't resist. I looked out again. She was there, closer this time, just a few feet from my window. Her head lifted slowly, revealing a pale, bruised face. Her eyes locked on mine, and her lips moved soundlessly. Run. Outline 4. The final night. I tried to pack my bags that night, but the air in the room grew suffocating. The whispers were no longer outside. They were in the room with me, circling, echoing. My lights flickered, and when they came back on, she was inside, standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but her mouth twisted as though she was being forced to speak. In a voice that wasn't hers, she said, "He's here." The next morning, my landlord found the guest house empty. My belongings were scattered, but I was gone. The police never found me. Neighbors still claim that on certain nights, they hear a man's angry shouts in the garden, followed by a woman's desperate screams. Story 4. The upstairs neighbor. Outline 1. The footsteps. When I moved into my new apartment, the landlord told me the upstairs unit was empty. Yet every night I heard footsteps pacing above me, slow, heavy, deliberate. At first I convinced myself it was just the building settling. But one night around 3 a.m., the pacing stopped directly above my bed. Then came the sound of dragging, as though something heavy was being pulled across the floor. When I mentioned it to the landlord, he looked uneasy. "That apartment hasn't been rented in years," he muttered. Outline 2. The investigation, curiosity got the better of me. One evening I sneaked upstairs. The door to the unit was padlocked, dust thick around the frame. I pressed my ear against it and nearly jumped when I heard faint breathing inside. I knocked. Silence. Then slowly, something knocked back. 3 deliberate taps. I stumbled away, heart racing. That night the pacing grew louder, more violent. I could hear furniture crashing, objects thrown against the walls. But when I called the landlord, he swore the apartment was empty. Outline 3. The history. A neighbor finally told me the truth. Years ago, a man had lived in that unit with his wife. People often heard fights, screams, and heavy thuds. One night, everything went silent. The wife was never seen again. The man vanished weeks later. When police searched, they found the apartment stripped bare, except for deep gouges in the floor, as though something had been dragged across it. Since then, no tenant had lasted more than a month. Everyone complained of the same thing: footsteps, dragging, breathing. Outline 4. The confrontation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:45, the footsteps started again. I stared at my ceiling, paralyzed. Suddenly, plaster began to crack. Dust rained down as something scraped directly overhead. Then, with a loud crash, a section of ceiling gave way. I screamed as a pale hand burst through, fingers clawing blindly. A guttural voice growled, "Where is she?" I fled the apartment that night and never returned. Months later, the building was condemned. But every time I drive past it, I swear I see movement in the upstairs window, someone pacing, waiting. Story 5. The neighbor who watched. Outline 1. The window. When I moved into my new place, I noticed my neighbor across the street, always sitting at his window. At first, I thought it was harmless, an old man watching the world go by. But soon I realized he was watching me. Every time I stepped outside, his blinds would shift. Every night, I'd catch the glint of his glasses as he stared into my living room. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being observed crept into everything I did. Even when my curtains were drawn, I swore I could feel his eyes on me. Outline 2. The notes. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "I like the way you sleep on your left side." My stomach dropped. That meant he had seen me in bed. I tore through my room, searching for hidden cameras, but found nothing. The next day, another note appeared. "Don't lock your window tonight." I went to the police, but they brushed it off, saying unless he trespassed, there wasn't much they could do. That night, I nailed my windows shut. But at 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of my front door handle rattling. Outline 3. The break-in. The next night, I stayed up with a knife in hand. At exactly 2:15, I heard the creak of my back door. My breath caught as footsteps padded through the kitchen. The lights flickered on their own, and I could see his silhouette, tall, thin, wearing those same round glasses, moving toward my bedroom. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone, but the line went dead. The house fell silent. When I peeked into the hall, no one was there. But on the wall, smeared in something dark, were the words, "You shouldn't have locked the window." Outline 4. The vanishing. I fled the house that night and stayed with a friend. When police investigated, they found no signs of forced entry. My neighbor across the street. His unit had been empty for over 10 years. The landlord swore no one had lived there since the old man who died in that very window decades ago. But sometimes, when I drive past my old home, I see him, sitting there again, glasses glinting in the dark, blinds slightly open.
Watching